Well, hello everybody. This is episode 2 of our Sew and Be Natter, and today we are joined by the fabulous Mitch Bridgewater, who you will have seen on the Great British Sew and Be episode series 8. Mitch, hello and thank you very much for joining us. And would you like to tell everybody about yourself?
Hello, it's a pleasure, and you're not far wrong just by introducing me by an episode. I was on episode 1 of Series 8 of the Great British Sewing Bee. I was 2022's worst best sewer on the Sewing Bee, but that is still 12th out of 10,000, so I'll take that. And I'm here for the ride, really.
Oh, bless you. I will ask you a few more questions about that, actually, about that series, because it was a very unusual series in so much as it was filmed, am I right in saying, during COVID?
Yeah, and touch wood, hopefully we're the only series that has to film during a pandemic. But yeah, we were filming coming out at the tail end of COVID and still had loads of restrictions when we filmed.
Yeah, so that must have been challenging. So we'll ask you a little bit more about that during the natter. And of course, we're also joined by the fabulous Alistair MacDonald.
Hello, everyone.
Everybody knows who you are, you see. You're sitting with that glorious wreath in his window, which must take ages to make, honestly. It's not made me one, by the way. Can I just say that? So this...
Well, the mega bus goes to Newcastle.
The mega bus. What's he like? So this week's whole episode was all about athleisure, which I don't like that word personally, but that's obviously because I'm old. But all about active wear. And the very first challenge that they had, which involved all 12 contestants. I was so pleased that Glendora was able to join them because she'd been poorly last week, and that had led to them actually not allowing anybody to leave on that first episode. But the first challenge that they had lasted 3 hours, and it was a pattern to make what they described as a complex cap with 7 panels. It had a mesh side with a reinforced peak and a fastening on the back. To all intents and purposes, it looked like a baseball cap to me. Mitch, what was your thoughts about that particular challenge and how people got on with it?
I thought for only week 2, it's quite an advanced first challenge, I thought. Not necessarily because it's complicated, but working with so many small pattern pieces is fiddly. I've got sausage fingers. I'd have hated doing it. But like a couple of years ago when they threw in a trainer challenge, throwing in a baseball cap, something different. And I know it's something you've talked about on the Natter about the show doing something different. It's been around a long time now. I kind of really enjoyed that they'd gone a different route and thrown in a baseball cap. And actually, all right, the quality of sewing was mixed throughout everybody, but everybody made something good and wearable. And I imagine not many of them have made baseball caps before.
No. I mean, the big thing, Alistair, of course, was the small pieces that they were working with. And that obviously had to be really quite precise and accurate. And then to throw in on top of that, they had all those rows of stitching. And Gaynor, I love Gaynor, because she didn't do 3 rows of stitching. No, she gave them a bonus 4th row of stitching on the peak. Now, you know, when you're working with those small pieces, one of the things I thought of straight away, Alistair, was you in the back of my head, tacking rather than pinning.
Yeah, well, that would be one of my big sort of like top tip, especially when you're dealing with fabrics. Like one was a very, very lightweight mesh. And from when they were handling it, I thought that was more like a dress mesh. That's not a baseball cap mesh. But the other problem you've got is even though so if we do like an upside down smiley face, you've got 2 curves that naturally when you put them together will interlock. However, when you're to sew that, you're putting one round the wrong way and you're having to fill all of that into that small space. Basting it in would have given you a flatter seam to be able to do. Plus also, I actually thought this was a really, really difficult challenge for the sewers to actually do. And the fact is that they're working on domestic machines. in the fashion industry, baseball caps, like the cap, the peak that goes in, it gets slotted into a giant jig, a clamp comes down, and then precision needles and feet go around and precisionally sew every single part of that cap. Plus also baseball cap sort of manufacturing is a bit like shoe manufacturing and accessory manufacturing. So the machines look very different. They look very, very weird. It looks like this big, long sort of spike that comes towards you, and the feed dog is right on the top, and you're sewing in around, so you can fit the most teeny weeniest thing. But to do that on a domestic sewing machine, hands down to everybody this week, because even I would have even have struggled with that, just because you're going with really thin layers to really thick layers. The peak itself, I don't know what the fusing particularly was, but a traditional baseball cap has almost like a memory board inside. And I remember my elder brother, when you got a cap in the 80s, you had to put it around a jam jar, you had to soak it, and you had to put elastic bands around it to get that really tiny little curve.
Oh.
So, but you had to set that overnight. So, but no, hands down to them. It was, I thought it was as Mitch said, for week 2, that really was a disaster waiting to happen. But as it happens, it wasn't.
No. Now the fabrics, they were allowed to choose themselves, but the mesh and the reinforced part of the peak, that was actually left for them. So it at least that gave it, we talk about often having a level playing field, and I thought that at least they did that by giving everybody that level playing field there. Where the one thing I have to say, Mitch, that I scream at the TV, and I was really screaming this week because of the tiny pieces, was a rotary cutter and your fingers. It does my head in, because one of these days we're going to see people with the blue tape on the end of their fingers. And because those pieces were small, now Alistair would always recommend that you use dressmaking scissors to cut round. What's your thoughts about the rotary cutter? You know what mine are, because I just...
I would think, certainly based on my series and people I've spoken to since, anybody that's on the show, if they were at home, they would use shears. They would just cut it out, pair of sharp scissors, and be done with it. When you're on the show, I think pressure of time, and because they put a rotary cutter on the table for you, it panics you into using it and not using it very well or safely. It's quick. I would argue that it's not much quicker than just doing it properly. But I do think, like you say, there will be an accident at some point. You see lots of people rolling quickly and in a panic towards their hands, and it does make my toes curl a little bit when you watch it.
There was one part of it I actually literally couldn't watch, and that's because many years ago I did have an accident because I was talking. Now I know you're going to be surprised that I was talking and cutting at the same time, but I was actually using, the proper ruler with the rotary cutter. If you're going to use a rotary cutter, and I'm saying if, there are different sizes of rotary cutter, and the one that's on their table is the standard 45mm one. The 60mm, which is the bigger blade, is what you would cut through multiple layers, but there's also a 28mm rotary cutter. So if you have to use one, and I would say please don't, because you should always have that ruler button up against it, at least take it down to a 28mm.
I think
Oh, Miss, just on that, because I'm not an advocate of use, especially for dressmaking or anything like that, using a rotary cutter anywhere. You've just hit the nail on the head. Because quilters predominantly use a ruler, you're applying so much pressure onto the fabric. When you're cutting it, you don't get the drag. Whereas when you've put a pattern piece and you've just got a few those little disc weights on the table, and then you see them, going like this and almost sort of like doing really odd things around the table, trying to get round corners and things like that. When you use a rotary cut, you're putting pressure onto the fabric. It will create drag and it will stretch the pattern pieces out. You will not get an accurate cut. If you use scissors, the scissors we're always taught, when this is old school, the scissors, let the scissors do the work. Do not push the scissors through the fabric, because that creates the drag. You're letting them glide through the fabric. That will give you a very neat cut.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Mitch?
Along the same lines of what Alistair was saying, actually, the other thing with those rotary cutters that you're left and encouraged to use is they are using the same rotary cutters we used in our series, which is 3 series ago now. And I would put money on them not having changed the blades, because they were blunt when we used them. And as we all know, if you're using a cutting tool, the most important thing about it is that it's sharp.
Yeah, I mean, those particular, all the projects that they use, because I can identify them, I'm a Prim ambassador, or Prim products. Quite rightly, I was always new quilt, new project, new blade. You then use that blade that you've taken out, maybe for felt or wadding, and then subsequently you can use it for paper. But what I would advocate, please, anybody who's watching this, don't use a rotary cutter, because you must protect your fingers. It flipping hurts like crazy, and you'll get blood on your fabric, which is even worse. And also, you're quite right, if you're cutting out more than one layer, you'll get that, what I would describe as a Mexican wave effect going on, and you're just going to, what Alistair said, ruck that fabric up, and you're not going to get an accurate finish. So that's
just a little tip what Kim said. If you're using a blade to cut fabric, but then you've decided that it goes in the box or the pile that is deemed to use for paper and other things, do what my gran would do. She got out this tray of nail varnishes, which were all coral pinks, and she would always put a dab of nail varnish onto it. So if you don't have a Sharpie pen or anything like that, just go into your handbag, get your nail varnish out and put a little dab on, and that tells you that that blade is for paper and it's one of the ones that you can't use for your fabric.
Yeah, perfect. Now, the other thing that they also referred to is hook and loop tape, which is the fastening at the back of the cap. The trade name is obviously Velcro. That's what a lot of people would know, but talk about. One of them, and I can't remember who it is actually, because there's a male and a female, Mitch, on hook and loop tape, hence the name. One hooks and one loops into it, and one of them, bless them, had put two, whether there were two hooks together or two loops together, and it didn't actually stick. Did you use Velcro in any of your challenges on?
No, we didn't use it in any of the challenges that when I was on. I've used it plenty of times since, and it's a mistake I've made since. When I've been doing the front of a child's coat and I've put bits of Velcro on because it's easy for them and they can do it themselves. I've got it where you've got 2 female bits and 2 male bits next to each other. The problem is when you do it on the show, the amount of time you're given is just ridiculous to unpick it and then to go and put it back on properly in the way that you'd want. It's just one of those things, and I was gutted because it was otherwise really nicely put together and a well-made cap. I would wear something like that. But thankfully it's an easy fix, and I'm sure when that cap comes back to them, they'll be able to fix it and carry on. But no, it's not the nicest material, I don't think, to work with, Velcro or hook and loop tape, but it definitely has its place.
Yeah, and I'm going to be putting a link on for a variety of things that were used in the show that's on the House of Alistair website. And don't forget, you've got that discount code, which is BBEE 2025.
2025, and some of you have already been using it. But if you go to if you use the drop down box, go to trims, you'll see the hook and loop, and loop.
So the winner of that particular challenge was Kit. The person who came 12th was Jess, and that was, now this to me is a little bit controversial. Kit's top stitching, he matched the threads with the fabrics, and Jess, who came last, her top stitch was contrast, and so therefore any wobbles that you had were more obvious. And I'm not saying that Kit did have wobbles in, but if you had a wobble, it seems to bed into the fabric much easier. What were your thoughts on that, Mitch?
When they gave the brief out, what we saw in the edit, They didn't say you had to use a contrast thread.
Mhm.
And whilst I really love to see contrast top stitching done well, I think in the nature of the competition, it's the sensible choice
Mhm.
to hide those wobbles and to hide those little mistakes. At the end of the day, the sewing bee is a sewing competition in name, but it's actually a speed sewing competition. And sometimes you've got to make decisions that you wouldn't make aesthetically at home. You might love to do a nice contrast top stitching, but if you want to go far in the competition, the sensible choice, match it with your fabric.
Yeah, yeah. What's your thoughts of that, Alistair?
Yeah, I mean, look, anything that you do, when you put any contrasting thread onto anything, you've got to be pretty. You can't. That's not a rush job, and that is not something that you take lightly. I mean, look, nowadays there's lots of things around. You can get feet that have a little guide that go into a seam, so that the foot is going into the seam and it's sewing along. There's lots of different things that you can do. Also, the biggest mistake people make is they watch the needle as they're sewing. Stop watching the needle. Look at the work. That's what you're looking at. If you look at the needle as you're sewing, you've no idea what angle you're feeding the work into. Look at the front of the work that you're going into. Leave the needle's doing what it needs to do, but it's almost like talking. You're talking to your sewing machine by feeding it in at the front. Stop watching the needle. That's when you will get really wonky stitching.
Yeah. Now, Novello, I noticed straight away when I was watching her on the sewing machine, sewing was actually at a slight angle. And that can be sometimes just the machine, or it can be that you're pulling and pushing, or you don't have the right needle for the right application. And I think because it was on the peak and it's slightly thicker, you've got that interface again. And I don't know if they do this, and I don't know if you did on your show, change the needle up. So you've got that slightly bigger needle, increase the stitch length if you need to. But if you make the stitch length too big, and you're going around that smooth curve, it's going to look like a jagged, do you know what I mean? Like an off jagged edge. Did you get the opportunity to change needles? Again, it's all down to time, Mitch. I appreciate that.
100% it's down to time. You do have on the sewing table in front of you, you do have a small selection of feet, you do have a selection of needles, and you can take with you some universal bits and pieces if you want to in your own sewing kit. Not a lot, but you could take some with you. When it comes down to time, people, when they watch the show, they think there's a team of people on hand to rush in and help you with your machine when you need to change something. There isn't. You just have to do it yourself. So you saw Kit changing his threads numerous times so that he was matching his colours. So it shows that if you plan well, you do have time to do things like change your needle, change your thread. But it's one of those things with that time pressure, you just wouldn't think to do it. Just get on the machine, get it sewn. Ironically, it will take you longer because you're not necessarily using the right tool for the job. But it's one of those time pressure things.
Yeah, if you're at home, then use the right needle for the right application and take your time, which is what we all, when I'm sewing and I'm teaching people, as you say, it's not a race. At the sewing bee, it is a race, sadly, because that clock is ticking. And the other thing is, if you, like you say, if you're planning ahead, not only do your top bobbins, but get your bottom bobbins ready. And you don't need a huge amount of thread. Mind you, what my one thing is, do not put one thread on top of another thread colour, because that's the big no-no. But if you do have a little bit of planning, and if you were at home and you wanted to do a challenge like this, you would have that opportunity to plan it all. Not that I'm ever going to go out and make a baseball cap, by the way.
Neither am I. And just another quick little tip: if you're ever, there's a one rule of thumb: if you don't have the correct shade, always go a shade darker. Never go lighter. Lighter will shine like an absolute beacon. So if you're talking about, if you're hemming a pink dress but you don't quite have that pink, go for slightly darker. Not too dark, but obviously just a shade darker. It will be fine. It's going to be less noticeable if you choose a lighter shade going up. That's just the rule of thumb. Always trim darker than the actual piece itself.
That's a great piece of advice. Well, I think on that particular challenge, I would have made them all winners because I thought they were all fabulous. They all look like baseball caps. Yes, I know it's a competition and we've got 12 people and they have to pick, pick bits out. But yeah, I think they all did amazingly well. So moving on to Alistair's favourite challenge, which is the transformation challenge. But before I'm going to do that, just to give you a breath, Alistair, last week you were so kind to do 3 giveaways, and it was the loop turners, also the wrist pin cushion, and we've
the magnetic one,
magnetic wrist pin cushion, not easy to say. And the winners and I've already messaged you so on the YouTube. So Rosina Till, now her comment, which was a really good one, we talked about gathers last week, and what she was taught to do was to sew in between a gathering stitch and then pull out the one that you could see. So, which I thought was a really nice tip. So thank you very much for that, Rosina. And please answer when I say email in so we can send you your prize out. The other one was, and it's 66 and Friends. We don't necessarily have right names on YouTube. So said that we didn't mention speed sewing, and we haven't, but I think we've pretty much mentioned it at the moment. Mitch, would you agree that it is a speed sewing contest?
Oh, 100%. It's a speed sewing contest. And I've said this, I always say this to the first person that's out every year, but I always say this to groups that I go and talk to. You could be the most precise, beautiful home sewer in the world, and you would not necessarily win that show.
Yeah.
It is about being able to do something that's passable quickly.
Yeah.
And that is a skill set all on its own.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that comment. And the last winner is Glenda Harvey, and she compared the Great British Sewing Bee to the Pottery Showdown. And what she said was, in the Pottery Showdown, they don't have the silliness and the humour, the cringe moment, she actually said. So that, thank you. So maybe they can learn from that. And she was really happy to hear the insights from Luke. So thank you very much for those people. And there was well over 100 comments, so thank you. Keep the comments going, because at the end of this show we will tell you what you stand the chance to win next time. Okie dokie. So thank you, Alistair, because you're dead generous. So the next challenge, as I say, was the transformation challenge. Now
dun, dun.
Yeah, build it up. I gave you a breath in between. I did give you a breath. This is the 90-minute challenge, and it was vintage cyclewear, of which I could have actually supplied a couple of tops. I liked some of the tops that they had as a cyclist. They were allowed 3, they're called cycling jerseys. They were allowed to choose some fastenings, but they were not allowed to add in any other fabric or any of the other haberdashery. They wanted good quality finished party outfit, and it was very much an outfit. It couldn't just be a top, and they wanted them to choose the jersey so that the colours worked together, but to disguise that fact that it was actually a cycling jersey. So we're dealing with lycra, stretch, not an easy challenge, and they were given 90 minutes to do that. Mitch, I'm going to come straight to you. What was your thoughts on that particular transformation challenge?
Now, I don't want to be too much of an Alistair, but I am on Alistair's side with the transformation challenge this week. I think this transformation is the thing that a lot of the viewing public dislike about that particular challenge. Number one, you're taking perfectly good, usable vintage garments and turning them into outfits, loosely using that word outfits. You, as somebody who does like to reuse and recycle things, you're using outfits that don't give you enough material to make a full going out outfit. I mean, I quite clearly do not wear a lot of cycling jerseys. I would look like a badly stuffed sausage, but I have seen plenty in my time, and usually there are a lot of rare, fairly small panels. You've
Mhm.
not got like last week where you've got a big amount of fabric on a circle skirt. You've got lots of small bits of technical fabric. And to ask them to make an outfit that you could go out in, I think it's a little bit cruel. And I don't really think there was anything anybody made that you would wear in public. And that's not a criticism of the sewers, that's a criticism of the challenge.
Mhm.
It's one of those things that's why people sometimes have questions about the challenge being a good challenge.
Go on then, Alistair, go for it.
I hated, absolutely hated. Now, I don't know what vintage shops they're shopping at, but there was not a single bobble. There was not, the print wasn't worn off. None of the crotches had seen a saddle.
It was only the tops. I've got one that the zip, I need to replace the zip. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, there was no wear and tear. There was nothing. So those were all brand spanking new tops from wherever they found them. I source a lot of vintage stuff for my TV shows, and look, I'm climbing through warehouses. I go in, you know, pristinely and what have you. I come out mucky because I'm trampling over 70 years worth of dust, you know. But I can't. Some of the challenges I've gone, actually, okay, that is something. For instance, if they're using, like, when they've done like knitwear and they've had to use that, I can understand that because we do consume a lot of knitwear and we have a lot of that. But like, for instance, like on Luke's one, when they took all that perfectly good cricket gear, I was almost crying because I thought, how many communities could have used that cricket, because it was a full cricket team, let's be fair, and they were just cutting up bit, and it was like, no, that's not that's just no, it just wasn't. I didn't think anything was, I mean, kits I thought actually, yeah, and fair due to him, I thought, yeah, that was actually quite, it was quite modern, it was quite sculptural, it was quite nice. It simplistically used the tops. There wasn't a lot of sort of like deconstruction in terms of the actual top, but he was using cleverly what was presented in front of him, which was a very good use of his time. It's just not my favorite one, and I hate it when it's like when they did one time they actually gave them people leather, and they were just hacking into this leather, and I was like, that is so, and it was new skins as well, and I'm like, you've got no idea what you're actually dealing with, but you've just given them an animal that literally you're just hacking into. And it's the same with these challenges. Yeah, I know it's supposed to be a bit of fun and it's time and what have you, but the message that they're sending out, especially with Patrick Grant being Mr. Sustainability and that type of message, I don't really think that that's really the association that he should be involved with in terms of this I think they could do something far better, you know, with the time. They could do another sort of like skills test. It could be, I don't know, they could do so much more, but it wasn't, this transformation was not one of my favorites. I didn't think it really added anything to, I mean, why would you take a cycling top to make a party outfit out of it?
You wouldn't. I mean, I worked last week as a volunteer at the Linskills Centre, and one of the guys, he actually gets bikes that are dumped at the tip, and he puts them back on the road. And we gave away 46 bikes last week, and I would have loved to have been able to give them 46 tops because there was a lot of adult bikes there. I would have loved to have been able to give them a top each. I'd love to give them, you know, all of the other bits. So yeah, I did cringe. But let's forget what it was actually, what they were doing. What they were dealing with was really stretchy fabric, because that's what it is. Ola actually put Godettes in. Well, she called them Godettes at first, God love her. Now, I thought it was really interesting.
I love a Godette.
I love a Godette. She actually taught herself to sew via YouTube 3 years ago. And it straight away, my granddaughter taught herself to crochet at Christmas by YouTube. YouTube's obviously a fabulous thing, but she created a party dress. Would you like to, Alistair, just explain what the Godettes are?
So usually it's a triangular insertion that you put into a flat seam, which then in turn it's sort of a bit like a box pleat in a certain sense. It gives volume. So it allows you to sculpt around the hips, and then if you put Godettes down the sides, it adds volume. But you can be very clever with it. So you can have a really panelled skirt, open those up, and then put a contrasting colour inside. So it can lend itself to being, you can put an awful lot of volume. But the other good thing about Godettes is when they fall down, they almost conceal themselves again. So it's only about when you actually move, that when you give a bit of a twirl, the air gets into it and it expands and it comes out. So they're really useful things. They're essentially a bit like a gusset.
Right.
It's a bit like half of a gusset. So for instance, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's like a gusset chopped in half. You're inserting that, but you can do that on anything. If anyone's needing to make flares, for instance, for a fancy dress party, and
70 flares, the 70 flares.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, back in the day, that's what people actually did. You know, they actually unpicked the side seam of their jeans and they put a fancy godette in as an insert into it, and then that gave them an extra bit of flair. So there's lots of things you can use them for.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good, for the challenge that she was doing. I thought that was particularly good to introduce something like that.
And time consuming.
Very time consuming, yes. Considering she only had 90 minutes, bless her. The other thing, the overlocker was used. How did you get on with an overlocker on your series, Mitch?
We were not allowed to use the overlocker until the made to measure challenge. Yeah, they also had cover lock. We weren't allowed to use that. So I don't know whether it was because of COVID rules or just the development of the series, but there are lots of things that this year's sewers have had access to that we certainly didn't in Series 8. And you just look at the jump in quality and price point of their main sewing machine from the ones that we used. They're worlds apart.
Yes. I mean, I've noticed particularly this year that because in previous years they've been not quite a Bobby Basic sewing machine, but they've been a fairly, low end machine, which is great because if you're introducing yourself to sewing, that's the kind. I would say go for slightly more than that 16 stitches, but it was absolutely fine what they were using. The other thing that they could have used, obviously, would be a walking foot as well if you didn't have an overlocker at home. But I was interested to know the other thing that's the big difference, I think, or am I wrong here? The number of contestants, Mitch, in your series, was there 8 or 10?
No, there was the same number.
Oh,
yeah, same number.
Seemed less. It just seems a lot of people this time.
I think the fact that we're into it, we got to episode 2 and there was still 12, possibly makes it feel like there was more.
Yeah, I just feel that there's a lot of people this time in the room. Ignore me. It's because I'm at a certain age. I think the judging on this one was really, really difficult. I didn't necessarily agree with the winner, who was Kit. It was fab, don't get me wrong. But the one I liked was the red and black one that Glendora did. I thought that was so striking. She came fourth, and the criticism was that she hadn't put the pink that was, there was pink used, and she hadn't put it at the top and the bottom of the garment. But I thought when hers was stood there, it looked absolutely fantastic. What were your thoughts on the actual winner, Mitch? Did you agree with that or not?
I think Kit is going to be fun to watch for as long as Kit is in the show. Kit's clearly got that creative out of the box thinking, and I think the most difficult thing with this challenge, when you ignore the limited amounts of fabric and the time constraints and everything else, it's very difficult with that stretchy fabric to give anything any structural shape without adding something to it. And I think for Kit to create such a dramatically different shape to a cycling jersey, I think that's got to be the reason that they won, because everybody else's, however creative and good looking they were, there were a lot of them that looked like cycling jerseys that had a frill or different coloured sleeves added. Whereas kits quite clearly looked very different to the pile of materials he was given to use. I quite liked Glendora's. I also quite like Gainer's. The all
Yeah.
blue, because they were more like swimsuits than going out outfits, and that sort of fabric just lends itself more to that than going out outfits.
I loved Gainer's when the presenter had asked her about would you go out in this particular outfit, because there was a few of them that were the bikinis, and she did say she'd been a wild child in the 60s, and she had that lovely wicked look in her eyes, and I thought, good for you. Yeah, it was good one. Alison, did you agree with it, the winner, or shall we not talk about it?
No, I did. Well, no, I did give Kit a compliment. I'm
yes,
not.
No.
Yeah, I did.
Criticize them. It's we don't criticize the contestants. It's the challenges that they're given is what we're not always happy with, isn't it?
Yeah. This challenge is always a bit of a this challenge is a bit like Marmite. You either like it or you hate it, and then there's the other ones that are Vegemite, which really hate it. But I actually quite liked, until I then saw the end thing. I think it was Stuart that did the sunflower.
Yes, the yellow dress, the clubbing party. He was going for a clubbing look.
Yeah, no, when I just saw the sunflower by itself, I thought, ooh, that's interesting. I thought, I wonder where, and then I saw the end product, and then I sort of thought, it's like it was a nice idea, but I thought I saw it and I thought, oh, that's really different to what everybody else is doing. You've created a really lovely flower, and you're going to do something. I think just a simple, like, from that flower, use it either on the side or slap bang in the middle, and do a little halter number with it. Just keep it really simple and let the flower do everything. Sometimes less is more.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I think they all had a sense of humour, this one, because even Stuart said, whilst it was a clubbing outfit, he'd be the taxi picking them up, not actually doing the clubbing himself, which I thought was quite funny. And I'm pleased they've got that sort of sense of humour. They've included it in the editing, because, like we said, I'm sure it was the case with you, Mitch. There's so much that was filmed that was never actually shown.
Absolutely. I think it was Tony who was on the other year. Whenever there is new sewing bees, the piece of advice he gives is ignore the edit. You know what happened in the sewing room. So much of it ends up on the cutting room floor. So much of it.
Yeah. So because yours was obviously coming out of those COVID restrictions, how did you manage? Were you in effectively a bubble, and you had to stay in a bubble, or were you isolated from each other, or?
How did you manage? The answer is I didn't.
You did.
But yes, so
Very hard.
the whole setup was quite intense. We had the same amount of prep time as every series has. You have a couple of months from finding you're on the show to actually going and filming. Once we got close to the date is when it got more complicated. So initially we just tested every month for COVID, then we had to test every week. And in the last 2 weeks before we even went to a film set, we had to isolate ourselves, which meant no work. I had to shut myself upstairs while my wife and children were downstairs. It was the most peaceful fortnight of my life. And we had to test every day for that final week. Then when we went to the location, what the production team had done is they'd hired a block of flats. So everybody in this block of flats was all to do with the sewing bee. So they kept it really controlled, who could see who and who couldn't see who. And for all of our made to measure challenges, all of the preparation, we had to make a face mask for the models because they weren't in our COVID bubble. Thankfully, you got to do that before you went and filmed the show, but it was just one extra thing to think about. I think a lot of people don't realize that if you're on the sewing bee, whether you're a finalist or whether you're like me who takes their bow early, you have to do the preparation for every show. So I made 9 face masks. I did 9 lots of preparation for the entire run of the show. So it's a lot of work. And then when you add the isolation, the COVID testing, and being bubbled up with people, I think it was all in all a month, considering I only was in one episode, it was a month from me seeing my children to seeing them again because of all of the isolation and being away filming. So it was a very surreal and intense thing. Then when we arrived at the filming location, we filming, they put different rules in place there. Obviously, all of the people that worked on sound, worked on the cameras, they were all in face masks. We had a nurse on site that tested us in the morning when we arrived for COVID, and little simple rules that affected your sewing. Like, for example, I almost always sew barefooter in my socks.
Mm-hmm.
Part of their health and safety COVID year, you were not allowed to. So I'd made the silly decision I was going to wear Doc Martens on TV, expecting that I would take one off to sew, and instead I couldn't feel anything that I was pressing for the whole thing. So it was a very, very strange, surreal. I mean, you've both done TV. It's a strange thing to go and do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you add all of these restrictions in place, and for me, when I went on the show, I'd only been sewing 6 months. It was a very surreal and intense experience. I wouldn't change it for the world. And if somebody said, we're going to do a redemption week, would you come back? I would do it tomorrow. But it is a very strange, surreal thing. And that's why you see so many of the sewers make decisions they'd never make at home. Never in a million years would you make some of the silly mistakes you make on that show.
Of
But
course.
because of that atmosphere, you just go into that blind panic mode.
So what's your thoughts then when you hear people say, particularly, and we're going to come on to that last, the pattern challenge, shall we say, when they say, I've never done this before, because obviously you knew what your brief was and you'd done some practicing. What's that initial reaction from you that they're doing something on that final challenge that they've never, and the contestants verbalize that?
I've never really understood the contestants that go, oh, this is the first time I'm doing it. I've not even practiced in the run up, because you do have time to practice at least once to have a go. I think the time scale of finding out you're on the show to get in there are, when you tell people you sew, I don't think people that don't sew themselves realize just how broad the spectrum of sewing is. There are so many skills, and you might sew for most of your life and you still won't know how to do certain things. And that is part of the challenge with it being different every week. They do like to throw in these skills that they think, oh, people won't have done that before. It will push them. But I think it's so important in your preparation work to try and run through those skills that you've never used before. I think what happens with a lot of people, it certainly happened with me, is you get that fixated on the first show, getting that first make in, that you find yourself running out of time to practice these skills. And they do ask you in the process of application for the show, have you made underwear before? Have you worked with lycra before? Have you worked with all these different materials and used all these different skills? And I don't know what other people when they applied, but I was quite honest and said, no, I've never done it before. And they are quite good. And they say, well, we will be doing it this year, practice.
Right.
But as with everything, everybody on there is a home sewer. Most of them are still working age. So if you work full time, you've got a family, other responsibilities, it's okay saying, oh, you've got a couple of months practice. Practically, you might not have a lot of time. So you have to pick your battles and focus on what you're going to try and get through. But for a lot of people, it's that first week. Try and nail those basic skills so that you can at least get through that. And a lot of people, it is a competition, but most of the people I know that have been on the show, none of them went on to win it. They went on to be part of it. So a lot of people that got really far in the show didn't think they'd get as far as they got. So they thought, oh, I'll never have to work with underwiring. I'll never have to work with boning. It won't be a problem. And then all of a sudden you reach that week and Esme thrusts you a pattern that you have been dreading.
Yeah.
You just have to deal with it the best way that you can. And that's what makes it an entertainment show. You know, if they just had experts on that had all the knowledge, it would be educational, but it could be very tedious.
Yeah, yeah. It's getting the balance, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to quickly go on and just cover this very quickly because I know we've been here quite a while. The last challenge was athleisure, my favourite non-word. It was they wanted you to have inspired fabrics and styles that were impactful and that they would work from an activity into leisure. Alistair, what was your thoughts of this particular challenge?
I'll leave this one to the Kardashians. You know, that this type of I've never. There's certain trends and certain fashions that I just can't. I no. If I to be honest, if when I want to go out, I want to get dressed up. I want to wear, you know, my matching. I want to have my matching shower gel, my deodorant, and my fragrance. I want to make sure my hair's done. I might, I might even, trim my eyebrows or whatever it is. But, I just make sure that that is what, and I like to dress smartly when I go out. I like to feel, because it's an occasion. If somebody turned up to an occasion I had organised in active leisure wear, I'd be like, It's like, for instance, when I was a student, and obviously Kim knows all about the big market in Newcastle, and I was enough trouble running around Newcastle without going to Paris. However, we went to go to the clubs in Paris when we were students, and we thought, oh, great, we're going to go this. And the French, fashion capital of the world, supposedly, nobody dresses up. They're all in jeans and scruffy t-shirt, and that's how they club. In Newcastle, or the vast majority of the UK, when you went out clubbing, most clubs in this country, if you didn't have dress pants and shoes on, you wouldn't get in. Now everyone's just sauntering around in, trainers, and it's. I think you've got to differentiate when you get out of bed to when you go to work to when you go to night. I think it can't be. I'm all for trans-seasonal pieces, especially when you're going on holiday. That makes sense to me, that you could change the top with the linen trousers and that type of thing. But literally to get to sort of like, you're almost getting out of bed wearing a onesie, which I have seen around, these parts. I've seen people in a onesie in the morning, and then when I've seen them going to co-op at night, they're in the same onesie and they haven't got out of it. So as you can tell, I'm not a massive, it's not, to me, it's not an opulent product, although some of it does actually command a lot of price, a big price tag, just because a rapper's done it or somebody like that. I don't necessarily find it. I don't. When I go out, fashion, if it's not hurting, isn't fashion. So if you're not squeezing your feet into those shoes that look fabulous, but you're going to end up with sore feet at the end of the night, then it doesn't really make sense to me. So I'm not a fan of that particular type.
I get it. So the one that you probably liked then was Glendora's, who actually made a yoga outfit from the stretch linen trousers. Very chic, I thought that one was.
I've written on the foot, I'm with Glendora on this one, because I there is a place for it. I call them sloppies in my house, and that's what I would wear to if I was doing painting or gardening or something like that. But I would not go out of the house in sweatpants and things.
But Mitch, from the technical point of view, because the fabrics that they were using obviously pushed them. They were dealing with stretch fabrics. So forget whether you like you're in Alistair. What did you think of the actual challenge?
From a technical point of view, some of these fabrics are extremely technical in terms of sometimes you actually need to be more mindful when you're actually sewing them. So, for instance, the feed dogs on a machine can actually jam up just purely and simply because of the stretch nature of the fabric. an overlocker is going to be your friend. Now, there was a big trend a few years ago about buying a cover stitch, which is essentially an overlocker, but it also allows you to do essentially making swimwear, essentially. But the problem with a cover stitch is you're actually sewing blind because your seam is actually underneath. So when you're putting it through, the top stitching looks all fine, but it's overlocking. It's. I mean, they're quite ingenious machines, but
they are. I've got one. They are. You can either buy a cover stitch, a standalone cover stitch, some overlockers or like a combined machine.
Yeah.
But very different from an overlocker because an overlocker will trim and edge, whereas the cover stitch does that. What you'll see in the shops, that double row of stitching, which is beautiful, and they've got access to all of those machines. So yes, they're a friend with this particular fabric.
They are, but for instance, there's a lot of people who still shy. Some people don't own an overlocker.
No.
I'm from a very old school type of the way that I was taught. Overlockers were not a thing. Overlockers were used for manufacturing. I came from an era where you always cut your seam allowance was always about 1.5 inches wide per side, and that was because in those days when you made something or you had something made, your weight would fluctuate, but it's the garment that you would buy wasn't just for that season. It was to be taken in or to be let out if you put a little bit of weight on. You know, the garments were, and if you look at vintage pieces, if you actually just look at the seam allowance to tell if something is genuinely vintage, you will see that it has like these monumental seam allowances inside, and that's exactly why, because clothes were a really well thought out commodity. But getting back to all these different fabric, there's different weights, there's different stretches. So for instance, you can have a 1-way stretch, 2-way stretch, 3-way stretch, 4-way stretch, all different types of stretches. So you can get stuck into a bit of hot water with them. The main thing to remember when you're using those stretch fabrics, not everybody's going to want this type of fabric lends itself to wanting to be bodycon, a lot of it. So for instance, if you don't like that look, that fabric type is not going to be for you. Always make sure as well, it's actually quite forgiving. So if you are someone who's making dancewear for maybe a dance troupe or something like that, you don't have to be so specific because it's going to be tight. It hides a multitude of sins because it's a bit like cling film. So it's stretching over something. So that's the best way of putting it. It's a bit like cling film when you're doing it. Always make it marginally smaller than the actual intended size that you're going, because you want it to stretch. You don't want it to just fit perfectly. You want it to actually stretch. That's the whole point of the fabrics. But there's lots of different types. For instance, you can have, a lot of them are using the hoodie jerseys. So there's different types of that. There's a fleece. You can get 100% cotton fleece lined, which on one side it looks like a normal fabric, and then on the other side it's fleecy. Then you've got what's called a loop back, which is smooth on one side. When you turn it over, it's almost like terry toweling. So there's lots of different types of fabrics. Just go out there and go. In fact, everybody just go and march to Primark. Go in there, and you will see so much leisure wear in there. And you'll see all of the different types of fabrics. You'll be able to feel them and touch them and see how the construction's made inside, and see that that's a really good way of getting to know what the finishes are.
Yeah. So Mitch, Ola's was the winner on this one. She actually, interestingly, made hers for an influencer who was never really going to do any exercise, which I thought was quite clever, which would fit in with Alistair. It was a cropped hoodie with a top and joggers, and she had the fold over elastic, fabulous draw cords in a hood that matched. It ended up, the draw cords were in our waistband as well. It was that lovely grey and orange outfit. I thought was quite striking. What were your thoughts on the winner on that, the garment of the week?
I absolutely loved it. And I do not like athleisure very much. My wife owns a gym, so our house is full of athleisure constantly. And you get a bit sick of seeing it. But because she'd taken it that influencer route, it didn't look like it would ever see a gym. It was more likely to be worn by the cool mum on the school run.
Mhm.
I thought it visually was really striking. It fit really nicely, which so much of this athletic wear, it just doesn't fit flatteringly. It doesn't have any real shape to it other than whatever shape you are. And I just thought it just had a really striking appearance. I love the color combination. I thought Orla had been really smart with a lot of the choices that she'd made, and she showed off a lot of skills. She did have things that fit the body, and you had to fit it really well. But she also had slightly oversized top, the hood, and I think she showed off a lot of skills as well within the make, which I thought you've got to do that if you want to stand out in that made to measure. You've got to, because so much athleisure wear is similar, other than the color changing. It fits the same, it's the same sort of shape. So to make something that stood out so well and to be made so well, and like you said earlier, this is someone who has learnt to sew from YouTube earlier in the year. I just love Orla's attitude to it. She's just like, sees what it is, bosh, I'm going to have a go. And she's got enough natural ability and has clearly put a lot of time into understanding the mechanics of making things, that she gets on very well with that way of approaching things. And I'm really glad that it got Garment of the Week.
Yeah, I was. And I have to say that Glendora's was the one that I would wear, because I'm not that young and nobody wants to see this body sucked in, to be honest. The other one who I think falls under the radar sometimes a little bit is Gaina, because her sewing is so beautiful. Her top stitching is so lovely, and I think I hope she does really well in this. She did the roller derby training outfit, and she had the bra top. It was a really good fit bra top. So yes, I think Gaina's a dark horse.
I don't think Gaina's not had a stinker yet. I know we're only 2 episodes in, but she's not had a stinker yet. I think Gaina will fall under the curse that every slightly older sewer that goes on to the B gets, is that the time will become an issue, not the ability to make anything.
Yeah. Now, going straight on to that, obviously, Orla got Garment of the Week, and we lost 2. Safi, bless her, I think her work is really good. She's had some fantastic ideas, particularly on her. Hers was the climbing. That jacket that came out the bag, it was ingenious. Time was just not her friend. And the other person who came home, who I think probably knew, was Peter, who last week Luke talks about the feedback that the judges gave, and it was really obvious on this one when Patrick and Esme went over to him. The first thing they commented on was his sweatshirt, that the ribbon wasn't sitting well. Now, anybody wanting to work with that, if you use the Vliseline the bias tape, that's going to work really well on something like that. So it's not going to stretch as he was putting the ribbon on.
But you know why that was standing?
The comment, that was one comment, but the other comment was
but you know why it was actually standing?
Oh, sorry.
So this is a technical thing. So for instance, whenever you're putting rib in, and who was it that did the 1999?
Oh, that was Jess.
Yeah, that was Jess. So Jess actually, I've got it written down.
She did it really well.
So when you're putting cuffs or anything like that, you always make them smaller than the circumference you're putting them into, because you're supposed to allow the volume on the sleeve or the collar, you make it smaller, because that will then make it lie flat. Any stand collar, when you're drafting the actual size of the collar, that's why it was standing up like a mandarin collar, because it was literally just cut the same length. If he measured all the way round, all he needed to do with that is to actually reduce the actual rib so it was tighter. And then what you do is you divide not into 4s, you do it into sort of like 8s all the way round the neckline, and you pin it all the way in or tack it down as I would do. And then you've got equal amounts that you stretch the ribbing underneath and place the your actual garment on the top, and you sew on the top there. And then what that does is it goes tighter into the collar, but it will lie towards the body. That was why it wasn't actually, that's why it appeared like a mandarin collar. But I did write down here that there was quite a few times when he said whatever he had, or the pattern that he had,
He didn't have a pattern.
It didn't come with instructions. There was something he said that didn't come with instructions, and I'm like, well, this is something you've already been told, and it's a made to measure thing. So they've told you have you measured your model? And he went, oh well, how hard can it be, you know? And it was like 5 inches too big on the waist.
Yeah.
And that's quite significant.
But I think it was interesting that both Patrick and Esme went over to him, and they did. We've talked about this previously, where if somebody said to you, that isn't working, or have you done that, and you haven't, to me, because they're the experts and they're the judges, I would be thinking, oops, take measure out, or oops, I need to do something. And he didn't. He just flew, you know, he flew by the night. Well, going back to the rib on the collar, Alistair, would you join that as a circle first and then insert it? Is it
yeah,
for the viewers, or would you have inserted it and then put that last seam in?
No, because you're actually what you would do is you can either do it 2 ways. You can either finish it at the center back, which is in the middle of where your neck runs down. You could finish it there if you wanted to. However, the nicest way of doing it is to finish it at either side. Yeah. What I would do is I would join the piece.
Yeah.
The piece, it doesn't need to be much smaller, but at least 2 centimeters depend on how stretchy the actual thing is. But you create that in one, and you put that into a solid neckline.
Yeah, that's how I would do it as well.
And then you attach it that way. And that's the same with cuffs. And the thing is, what you can do is when you've got that excess fabric, you can stretch the bottom. As long as you've put equal markings all the way around, you can stretch it and you can overlock it. Most overlockers, some people overlook the overlocker, because sometimes you have a twin needle one. If you can get a twin needle overlocker, it's always preferable, because you're actually overlocking and you're seaming at the same time. You're not overlocking each individual piece, you're sewing it up and you're overlocking it at the same time. It's a game changer.
Yeah, it is. Did you agree with who went home, Mitch?
To be honest, both of them had gone off my radar. From last week, they both had a really good week. I thought this week, that first challenge, Peter was second, Safi was fourth. In the second challenge, Peter was midway, Safi had a bad one. I think on many of the other seasons, they would have got through, because they're both clearly very, very talented sewers. As you mentioned a minute ago with Safi, some of Safi's ideas are just so wonderful, so out of the box. I thought if Safi had nailed that climbing outfit, that could have been Garment of the Week, because it was just so creative, so technical, so different to what everybody else was doing. I do think they're both really unfortunate. Selfishly, it does mean that I've got 2 new members of the First Out Club. So that's nice for me. But I do think they were both unfortunate. I think it's going to be really tough this year, because I think they are a really, really strong bunch all the way through.
Yeah, actually, Esme's comment at the end was that we have got she said the standard of sewing is pretty good, and that's high praise from Esme.
Indeed.
This year. So yes, it was very good. Next week,
I do want to give a little shout out, because there's one comment that I did, and actually Stuart's Wimbledon-esque.
Oh, that was lovely.
That was so beautifully executed, and it was using two very simple things: a nice bit of piping, and then just a little dash of color contrast. It was so beautifully done.
The zip was gorgeous as well.
Yeah, everything was done. And also Patrick, well, he might have done, it wasn't in the editing, but if you saw the actual stitching in the collar when the model moved, you could see the attention to detail. It was very well thought out. The fabric choices were fantastic. Piping as well is not the easiest of things to get in, because it's an insert tape, and if you don't sew close enough to the piping, it starts waving in the seam, and it starts to look a bit messy and a bit awkward. But no, I mean, to put piping into jersey and create, you know, that volume, but the thing is, he had nowhere to hide, because the lines in that garment were so neat and tidy. Everything had to be pristine. There were 10 million panels going on where you might not see where the join quite goes. But he had nowhere to hide. And I actually wrote down Wimbledon. There you go. I actually wrote down Wimbledon, and then I put a cross to it, and then put Orla, which actually was a really deserving winner.
Yes, I think it's really hard with the garment of the week. Next week is dress icons. So they're going to be doing a wrap dress. You're going to love the transformation, Alistair. Punk from Soft Furnishings, God help her. And then a Versace inspired runway. So that's next week's challenges for them. You know, I wish them luck. Mitch, can I say a massive thank you to joining us? I know we've taken up a lot of your time this evening, and I know you've technically put the kids in a cupboard.
I've run away in the camper van.
Don't let anybody know where you are, right? He's very, very busy doing very important things. But I'm so looking forward to seeing you at Colour Coats WI the last Wednesday in September, because you're coming up to talk to the ladies and anybody else who wants to come. So I'm really pleased to be seeing you. I'm going to pop on your social media links and your website. So if anybody wants to follow Mitch or to find out what he's doing, then you can pop on there. Alistair, you have a giveaway this week.
I do, and I have now. So it's only one this week.
Oh, it should be, because I know what it is.
So one lucky winner. Now this is just done with random comments. This is one of the House of Alistair pressing mats. It's the large one.
Wow.
So it's not a mini, it's a large one, and that's in our signature black and cream. We've sold loads and loads and loads of these. So this is what couturiers and tailors use on Savile Row. So if you want to be in with a chance of winning this mat, this will be sent out to you. It's 100% wool. You just need to, it doesn't matter what your comment is. You could comment that you didn't like my shirt this week. It's entirely up to you. But comment, you will be chosen at random. So there's one up for grabs. This is worth over £30. This is a very expensive mat. We also do an even bigger one than this, which is nearly £100. So yeah, so this is a really sought after thing. And also, you will never have crisper seams ever when you use this. Forget all the
really work.
Yeah,
really works.
They're really good.
It really works. So Alistair, you are obviously, we've got the bias tape, we've got some ripstop fabric, we've got jerseys, you're going to be loading up some ribbed fabric, and you've got the hook and loop already on the House of Alistair website page, and I'll also put the link on for the discount code as well, just in case anybody has not seen last week's.
Yes.
Next week we have Mr. Scott, John Scott, joining us, so that'll be interesting. We love John.
Very interesting. Well, I'll be seeing him.
Yes,
I'll be seeing him very soon.
Exactly. Yes, get him
much
sorted. If anybody is going to Festival of Quilts, I will be at Festival of Quilts on the Thursday afternoon and the Friday. I'm not working, but come and say hello. And that's about it for this week. So thank you again, Mitch, and I'll see you very soon. And I'll see you very soon as well, Alistair.
Yes. And thank you very much, Mitch. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks so much for having me both.
You're welcome. Thank you, my darling. Bye-bye.